Good afternoon, and welcome to another MarineLog exclusive webinar discussion on how green technologies are shaping the design and operation of U.S. ferries. Due to modern regulations and a growing industry need, ferry operators, the naval architects who design those ferries, and technology companies are coming together to work toward decarbonizing U.S. ferry fleets. We will hear from each of these three sectors of the industry today as we talk to Morgan Fanberg, President and CEO of Glosten, Raymond Scott, Marine Services Director of Kitsap Transit, and Ed Schwarz, Vice President of Sales for Marine Systems for ABB. If you are attending our annual Ferries conference next week, and I hope you are, you'll get the chance to meet Morgan, ABB, and many others directly involved with green tech and the ferry business in San Francisco. You can find out more about this event on marinelog.com under our conference tab. During today's discussion, you will learn what green technologies are being implemented in U.S. ferries, how the push to alternative fuels impacts the design of modern ferries, and much more. Please also stick around at the end for an audience Q&A. If you have a question for our presenters, please submit it at any time during this talk using the Ask a Question box below the video feed. And now we're just going to jump right on in. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Sure. Absolutely.
All right, Raymond, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell us first off, why are ferry operators moving towards green alternative fuels in the first place?
I think there's a couple of different reasons why ferry operators are moving in that direction. If you would ask me that question a year ago, fuel prices probably wouldn't be high on that list. But now the price of diesel is ridiculous, and that's a main factor in a lot of anybody's budget is now the fuel cost. And a lot of these alternatives, the battery, the hybrid, the hydrogen, they're becoming more prevalent, and so we're able to get some of those things in there. So it's helping offset the cost of not having to put diesel on the boat. There's reduced maintenance on a lot of these systems. We have a vessel that's a hybrid vessel now. The maintenance on those is much lower, so you're saving money in fuel and also in having your mechanics or your maintenance staff actually work on the boats. For public sector folks like myself, there's a lot of federal incentives to go green, to convert or to build new vessels that are not fossil fuel vessels. The government's helping out a lot by funding most or all of some of these projects to go to the decarbonization side. And there's also that environmental stewardship side of things as well. It's going green because it's the right thing to do. We're concerned about global warming. We're concerned about the environment and our impact on it. So the ability for us to do something to better the environment or to at least prevent more damage in the long run is something I think is really attractive to a lot of different operators, whether they're public or private. Okay.
And can you tell us what Kitsap is currently doing to move toward green or alternative fuels, Raymond?
So 2 or 3 years ago, 2019, we had a vessel built and designed by Glosten, was the designers, and All American built the vessel. It was the first battery electric hybrid vessel that was in the Puget Sound. So with that boat, we've had that in operation for almost 3 years now, and that was a really good kind of stopgap or getting into that green side of things and getting away with just a fully diesel powered powertrain. And it kind of gave us a taste of what is possible with going with electric propulsion. We are also working with Glosten as well to do a full electric version of that vessel as well. So we're going to get rid of those diesel engines on that vessel and go completely electric, and it's going to take over the same kind of operational parameters that vessel is running now and replace one of our older aging vessels. So we're really pushing towards going with the all electric and trying to be kind of the leaders in the Puget Sound area with trying to get those green vessels and trying to get everything going. We're also working with Glosten as well and Washington Maritime Blue for an all electric high-speed hydrofloating ferry. Because that's kind of where there isn't much space in there for high-speed craft that are all electric. And so once we break that barrier, it's going to open up a lot more opportunities for folks that operate the high-speed craft like we do on a lot of our routes to be able to go all electric and be sustainable and not have to worry about putting diesel on all of our boats.
Yeah. Okay. Morgan, so Morgan's with Glosten, for those of you who don't know. What would you say is the driving change to decarbonization, and particularly in the ferry industry?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. So very similar to things that Ray just mentioned. In addition to that, there's momentum behind international regulations like the IMO's Energy Efficiency Index for existing ships. That's the EEXI. And then there's also one for new ships, the Energy Efficiency Design Index. That's the EEDI. Certainly pressure from federal, state, and local governments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental requirements. There is a desire to finally shift away from burning fossil fuels, doing the right thing. As Ray mentioned, there's also a desire to not be an emitter of pollution close to cities and communities. But in many cases, the cost to replace vessels can be offset with available government incentives and grants, just like Ray had also said. So.
Okay. Morgan, getting into the design aspect of this topic for a minute, what ways will these alternative fuels change the design process? Has it already, or what do you anticipate?
Absolutely, and this is why it's a good time to be an engineer in this historic time frame. So there'll be an initial emphasis on how to decide which alternative fuel source or future-proof propulsion system or to design around. That'll be the first step. This will be based on geographic locations, routes, mission profiles. Making these decisions will happen as part of what I would call an initial feasibility study before any real design begins. Once that design starts, there's going to be a huge, significant changes to what you call traditional machinery arrangements due to new fuel storage requirements, hazardous zone arrangements, stringent regulatory requirements. There's just going to be a requirement for more space, and perhaps so the vessels may get larger, or you may decide to decrease the time between refueling due to a limited range based on how far you can go on alternative fuels or batteries. There's also going to be a significant effort to improve efficiency and use less power. For example, more efficient consumers of ship service power, more efficient hull forms, better propeller design, just an overall theme of increased efficiency.
Okay. Morgan, I think you would be really good to answer this question about safety issues. So sure. What safety issues need to be addressed when designing for alternative fuels?
Big theme about how to handle hazardous materials. There's an increased risk of explosions to the volatility of these alternative fuels that are being presented. Toxicity concerns around ammonia. If you're going to need an inert gas system for some of these alternative fuels, and if that fails, it could be a significant concern to health. But for the most part, the safety concerns are centered around the risk of fires, how to put out battery fires. This will add to arrangement constraints and concerns. There'll be new sensor systems on vessels to deal with more sophisticated issues and how to accommodate these new fuels.
Okay. Ed, you're up. You're in the hot seat.
All right.
So Ed is with ABB. I would like for just a second to look at Europe. We always hear, about the new green technologies being commonly utilized there. Is the technology here in the United States mature enough for the ferry market?
Sure. So that's a good question. Yes. The short answer is yes. It's not a unique technology that's just in the U.S. We're all kind of using the same technology, and we're kind of adapting it for U.S. applications. So what we see is areas that kind of have the most experience kind of grow from that experience and kind of adopt changes and efficiencies and become better at it. So if we look at when I started working with ABB, about 6 years ago, Scandinavia was really kind of leading in hybrid technology. They were, boasting, every month another battery-equipped vessel would be delivered. And I was a little concerned about how the North America market would implement this change. It was a big change in technology. And having spent my entire career, in fact, first started sailing on steamships, not by choice, but just that was what the U.S. flag Jones Act ships were made of. Mm-hmm. I was kind of a little bit nervous, but completely wrong. The North American market, especially the ferry market, is really ripe for this technology. This technology fits really nice with this application. So we're seeing a very quick move in North America to adopt this technology. Like Morgan and Ray had said, but the federal funding that's available, that's helping to facilitate this change. The technology is getting more mature. It's definitely right now a revolution of the short distance shipping market, especially if we're talking about ferries and in this topic today, where the U.S. and Canada are really kind of global leaders. If you look at the amount of volume of ferries in the United States through the Department of Transportation, it's significant. And I think what we're going to see quickly is the U.S. and North America really kind of capture the lead and kind of get out of the shadow of Europe, because as Europe kind of taps out with the amount of applications they have compared to the volume of applications that we have, I think you're going to really start to see a shift of acceptance of this technology and the ability to execute it in the U.S. And the yards are becoming more equipped to work with it. The designers are more equipped to be able to produce a design using new technology now. So yeah, I don't see any limitation to North America for this technology. And in fact, I see us as this is kind of a chance to kind of for the American and North American market to kind of rebrand itself. We're kind of known as the old technology in the maritime industry. And now we're seeing a shift with some of the vessels that are on the books now that are either larger installed power of energy storage than those in Europe, or longer runs, or more challenging execution models that I think will really put North America on the map for this technology for sure. And there's nothing limiting with North America as a market that would limit them from being able to execute this technology.
Sure. Okay, Ed, you hit on this, and I think Morgan also brought it up, funding. Something many of our viewers will want to know about is funding. What resources are out there? What funding sources are available to offset the increased capital cost of ferries, whether they want to use batteries or alternative fuels? And maybe, Morgan, you can start with that, and Ed or Ray, if you have anything to add, please feel free.
Yeah. So what's out there right now? Well, based on kind of a European model, there are market-based incentives like emission cap and trade schemes where operators can sell permits on the open market. This is happening in Washington State. This is partially how WSF has been able to fund some of the initiatives they're doing. There are also incentives based on potential carbon taxes. Ship investors are taking into account emission performance in their underwriting portfolios. So things are changing. There's also federal government grants. We should all be aware of the FTA passenger ferry grant program. I believe that's like $300 million is available to improve ferry service or expand ferry service. There's $40 billion of funds available in the Inflation Reduction Act for offshore wind, shipbuilding, supply chain support. And there are several state grants available to clean up ports and reduce harbor craft emissions. California has a lot of grant programs. Washington State has a lot of grant programs. I would imagine even in the future, there's going to be a lot more funding available to offset the high cost of replacing vessels in the U.S.
Yeah, Ray or Ed, do you have anything to add to that in terms of funding?
Yeah, I just want to say you don't just go after one source. So with like our new electric ferry that we're having designed and being built, we went and got an FTA grant, and we also went to the state and got state money as well. So we were able to essentially almost double dip to make sure that we have almost all of that cost for the vessel to be built and put into service, and also the shoreside infrastructure portion of that. So when you're going and asking for these things, you ask for everything you possibly can, and then if you have to scale down after the fact or look for more money elsewhere, you can do that. But don't limit yourself to asking for one thing. Apply for as many things as you possibly can, and apply often, because a lot of these are also competitive grants. So you have to have some semblance of an idea of what you want to do, and it makes that competitive process a lot easier to be able to secure those funds. But go after FTA grants, go after any kind of federal money. Look at your state to see if there's state funding available, so you can piggyback on there. And a lot of times the state funding will satisfy the 20% match for the federal funding. So it might not cost you any money out of pocket if you're able to be in a state that offers incentives to get any kind of grants or funding.
That's great. Okay. All right. This is kind of a question for any of you. So my question to you is, where do alternative fuels, hydrogen, et cetera, make sense versus batteries, for example, for zero emissions or low carb solutions? Ed, did you want to go ahead and start this question?
Sure, I'll go first, and then I can be quiet because I'd like to hear what Morgan and Ray have to say about this topic too. So I would say the rule of thumb is if you can cover it with batteries, it's probably the best solution. Batteries are the easiest with regard to what's being done with the regulatory bodies. For the design side, it's kind of an established technology. It's a known quantity. It's probably the easiest to design for batteries. So I would say that that would be the rule of thumb when you're looking. If batteries can do the job, that's probably going to end up being your best solution. But if batteries can't do the job, then you're going to be looking into these alternative fuels. And I would say another thing is when you start going down the path of alternative fuels, throw away everything you know about the diesel fuel or carbon fuels and stop trying to compare them because you'll always be disappointed. You'll always, when you compare it to the energy density, when you compare it to the caustic nature, the storage, so you really got to come with an open mind and kind of stay focused on that goal of decarbonization and don't always, look at all the difficulty that comes with it, but really kind of be inspired for what you're trying to achieve, because we see that a lot with people who always want to compare it back to the known quantity that is diesel oil, and that's a tough comparison to make with these alternative fuels. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, so I agree definitely, Ed. Batteries are usually the preferred choice for most of the domestic ferry fleet. But it won't work in every case, and that is exactly right. Range is definitely the first consideration on how to go further. It doesn't mean you can't design your new ferry around batteries. A hydrogen fuel cell or having some type of fuel cell on board is a great alternative. We are also finding that the infrastructure side, and we can talk more about infrastructure side and the costs associated with that, getting power to ports and to new facilities is really expensive, and in some case it could be easier actually to get an alternative fuel. I mean, it sounds crazy, but the amount of cost to get a utility to get on board with running new power to docks and ports is really expensive, and it can be very time consuming. And in some cases, it may be easier to find a hydrogen source at your dock for a fuel cell operation.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that too. I mean, if you're looking at which alternative fuels you want to go with, you have to look at what is available in your area. What is your operating profile? Because hydrogen might be great for folks down in the Bay Area where they're already setting up some kind of hydrogen fueling area, and there's already hydrogen in that area. But where I'm at up in the Seattle area, there's no hydrogen producers. There's little to no real infrastructure beyond that, the electric market. So you just have to kind of look at what kind of operating profile you want to do, what's available in your area, and kind of try to plan around that, or work with the other folks that are in your area to see if we can come up with a way to get some of these kind of alternative fuels, the infrastructure set up, and go at it as a group instead of trying to go singularly with trying to get some of these things brought into the area that you're at.
Yeah, and just a final comment, but a lot of this is looking into a crystal ball. For all these alternative fuels, there's very few green sources of these fuels. We're all aware that it takes a lot more fossil fuels to make hydrogen, ammonia right now. So looking into the future, if we find green sources of power, renewable diesel is a viable option that could be used with very little impact going forward. Just something to be aware of. We're trying to predict the future here a little bit on where we will be able to find green sources of fuel, which is it's not apparent right now. So.
Yeah. Ed, the electrify everything guy, as some of you know him as. Can you add to this topic a little when looking into building a new hybrid or all-electric vessel? What can one expect? With regard to the increase in capital expenses?
Sure. Yeah, tough question, but a fair one. I think it's very honest to talk about the cost. We know the benefit is decarbonization. So the cost in general, you're looking at probably a 2 to 2.5 times price for that propulsion shaft line from diesel mechanical to some type of electric. Now it depends; it could get much more, but that's kind of like a baseline that I would use. And it also depends on the amount of batteries that are installed, or if you're looking at these alternative fuels, it could get even pricier. But I think the key is also to look also in those operational costs. So like Ray had said, is is reducing the OpEx should also be part of this CapEx consideration. So if we look at operators, ferry operators, in this case, the number one expense they have is, after maybe personnel, could be everything related to engine. So it's either diesel fuel costs and engine maintenance. And then it's usually also looked at as kind of the biggest liability on the vessel of something going wrong with the engine and takes the vessel out of service, is kind of perceived as also part of this, cost of operation. So I think it's looking at that kind of holistic view of this new technology, and then also being able to turn on some of these remote diagnostic systems, these types of things that come with digitalization that will help improve on the OpEx side of things too. So it's not, in electrical systems, you tend to not run them to failure like you do mechanical systems, but you kind of, they run pretty much maintenance free, but you can also have early indicators of issues to be able to do, preventive maintenance rather than failure maintenance. So yeah, I think it's definitely a cost consideration, and that's why the funding is there too. I mean, let's be clear that a lot of this federal funding and this grant funding and state funding is to offset this additional CapEx that comes with electric propulsion, so that it's just not as big a pill to swallow for operators.
Okay. Ray, in your experience with Kitsap Transit or otherwise, what barriers are ferry operators facing to move to a green or alternative fuel landscape?
I think universally it's going to be infrastructure. There hasn't been the same kind of money and effort put into the shoreside infrastructure piece of this as they have, say, the bus side. We're kind of in a unique position where we operate both buses and ferries. So our bus side of the house is already looking at putting inductive chargers in parking lots or in their transit stations. We're ordering electric buses. We've already been moving towards that route for a while now. But there's nothing in the maritime sector that people are actually investing in bringing the electricity down to the water. There's always been a great fear of mixing salt water or fresh water in electricity. So everybody's kind of had that, let's not go there. That's, let's try to minimize that as much as possible. But that's where we're heading towards now. So I think the greatest hurdle that we have is you're not only trying to fund a vessel being constructed, now you're also trying to fund and also construct the shoreside infrastructure. So it's not like traditionally where you get a diesel vessel built and you already have dock space, you just go tie it up and you turn it off, you forget it, you come back in to run your next trip, you start it back up again. With the alternative fuels, whether it be electricity or hydrogen or ammonia or whatever method you want to go with, there's not that there yet. So you've got that lag too. You've got to plan out in the future of, okay, we're going to be potentially having to either secure a portion of our operations to be able to bring in this infrastructure, or we're going to have to wait to get the vessel here until this infrastructure is here. And anywhere that you do any kind of work you do over water requires a lot of permitting. It requires time with multiple different agencies. So it's something that you really have to plan ahead for. It's not something you can just say, oh, I'm going to get an electric vessel next year, and you don't have any infrastructure set up. It could be many years before you get the permitting to be able to do the work over the water and get the additional structures added. So I think the thing that is the biggest hurdle is the infrastructure. And the other topic is, what Morgan was saying earlier, there's no crystal ball. Nobody really knows which method we're going to be going with. And that's the one that everybody's going to be striving towards. I mean, batteries have been kind of the forefront of that. And that's what it's easiest from an operator's perspective to say, okay, well, let's just go ahead and make a fully electric vessel. It's less for crew training. There's less time associated with having specialized crews to go and, hook up, or bring special people in to be able to fuel the vessel or do whatever you need to do with. So that's kind of, trying to figure out what's going to be best. But, if we had a crystal ball and we could say, this is where we're going to go, that would make things a lot easier. But instead, we're just, I think if enough of us get in and do the same thing, that'll help drive. So a lot more folks will be able to say, okay, yeah, now that it's kind of established, this is the route that we're going to be going.
Okay. So keeping on topic with challenges or hurdles, what about regulatory hurdles? Morgan, maybe you can answer this. Do you expect any challenges as far as regulations are concerned when it comes to alternative fuel designs?
I expect a lot of regulatory challenges.
Right, me too.
I mean, mostly because there's very few projects that have happened and gone through a regulatory scenario and open up this box of what do we do next. Obviously, the Coast Guard is trying to get ahead of this and work with different operators and design firms to do the right thing. I mean, this all comes down to safety, and I touched upon all the safety concerns with all the alternative fuels and risk of battery fires. All of these things are going to come to light. So the Coast Guard. My suggestion is, if you're going down this path of a new alternative fuel project or a new battery ferry, is to talk to the Coast Guard very early and start those discussions immediately, and have them as a partner and not just an adversary to what you're trying to do. Bring them into the project, bring them into the fold. I know they want to work with everybody. It requires a lot of communication, and just prepare for the amount of time it's going to take. Going through design review is going to take longer. Revising things as you go, work with class societies, ABS, DNV, Lloyd's, talk to them early as well. This, again, it's uncharted territory. My suggestion, like I just said, is just to start the discussions early and start the process, and it'll set you up for better success.
All right. Ed, is there a regulatory commonality between the shoreside power and vessel systems?
I wish. So this kind of builds on what Ray was talking about. The without a doubt, the hardest part of going electric is really the infrastructure side. It's the vessel side has its challenges, certainly, but it's getting kind of worked out, and there's limitations on vessel design, and you can fit it within the envelope, either fits or it doesn't, kind of thing. But the shore side is really, really challenging, and it's challenging for the maritime industry in general, because we as an industry kind of rewarded ourselves as being as autonomous as possible. Like every boat, like, if you can make your own water, be your own sewer, produce your own power, all you need was a line on a dock and maybe a trailer, for some parts, and that was it. Like that was going to be a really successful operation. And this is the complete opposite. This is now you have to have a really close relationship with the utility or providing the power, figuring out that side of the puzzle, and there isn't clear guidance. So right now we have the rules for the vessel could be governed by the Coast Guard, possibly class, but usually in these ferries it's a Coast Guard approval process. But the shore side is completely different. Is it going to be IEEE standard? We're not really too sure. Sometimes it's a civil code. A lot of the same equipment cannot be used. A lot of the same design cannot be used. And it's also, for people to understand, it's a very involved, I'll say, to avoid the word complicated, handshake between the shore side and the vessel side. There needs to be a communication between these two systems, because you're charging these batteries. It's a safety concern that making sure that the power is being called for when it should be called for, these types of things. So it's definitely probably the most complicated. Like Ray had said, part of it is figuring out the infrastructure working. Over the water is very expensive and very timely. Most projects that we talk to with owners, the vessel will be delivered before the infrastructure is there, which sounds crazy. Typical maritime projects where it takes 18 months, 2 years to build a boat, and you're still not going to have maybe a plug on the other side by the time that's done. The fact that we operate, if it's a ferry operation, it's usually in a high congested area of a downtown port area, which brings a lot of complications, a lot of different regulatory groups. So you got your utility requirements, and then maybe you have someone who's selling the power. Then you have the city requirements. You could have a municipal requirement on top of that. The power quality issue with utilities is different than that of onboard vessels. So that's other things to take into consideration when you're speccing equipment. It tends to be that, it's just not universally the same transformer you use on a ship. You can just kind of spec for civil work is typically not the case. So it is definitely challenging. And I think these first projects, you definitely have to kind of really look at the holistic utility to propeller system, or else you may get some very costly lessons learned through the process. And to me, that would be very, very disturbing, because we want to reward these first adopters. Like everyone's probably tired of hearing me saying this, but I have such love for first adopters of technology. They take the risk, they go through all the regulatory requirements in front of everybody else. They put up their money. They really commit to it, that it's so important that they be successful, that they have a good experience with it, because they're really kind of blazing that trail for everybody else. So yeah, all first adopters have a special part in my heart. And what I say is, look at the whole system. Even if you don't plan on doing some of this work right away, at least have a plan for it, so you don't get caught by any surprise, and more kind of that future-proofing the system. As we know, boats in the U.S. flag are going to run for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. 70, so they're going to have a long life, and technology is going to evolve over the course of that life. And part of that's going to be the infrastructure developments over 6. Can we imagine what the battery of New York is going to look like in 70 years? Like these types of things are going to have so much evolution that we want to make sure that the vessels are going to fit into that design change over time too, is important. And that you don't have the proverbial DeLorean boat sitting there that, you can tell exactly what day and what month that boat was built, because it's such a timestamp of a certain design and feeling. You want something that's going to be kind of universally viable as regulatory requirements, increase for decarbonization, and then again that infrastructure side. So it's very challenging. I don't know if I answered your question. I might have rambled there.
No, you did.
But I think I entertained Morgan, so that's most important.
You did entertain me, because as marine engineers, I mean, your point about how we have, all of our professional life has been all about independent, creating a ship that has all the services. And this whole shoreside infrastructure problem is unique, and it's new, and you're dealing with civil engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers that they don't have a marine engineering mindset where we just have to take care of everything. And now you're entering a whole different world. So yeah, you definitely entertained me.
Good. Morgan or Ray, anything else that you have to add about shoreside infrastructure? I think Ed was very thorough, and Morgan, you had a little bit more to say, but anything else before I move on to something else?
Yeah, I just want to, double down on that.
Sure.
From an operator's perspective, the future proofing of things. I mean, that's incredibly important. It's like, we don't want to have this one-off, and then, because when we do get the federal money for any of these vessels, they usually have, at least a 25-year lifespan on that boat. So you're stuck with that boat for 25 years. So you want to make sure that during the whole planning phase and the construction phase, it's something that you're going to want to and be able to use for those full 25 years without having to reinvest. Because a lot of, as a public entity, we're very conscious of the money that we're spending as the taxpayers' money. So we don't want to just go out and waste money on some harebrained idea and then have it completely fail and just sit at the dock and not do anything. So I think it's, for us, the operator side, it's that future proofing of that both shore side and of the vessel side as well.
Sure. Out of curiosity, is there a segment of ferries, and Ed, I think I'm going to direct this towards you, but is there a segment of ferries where battery hybrid doesn't make sense?
Well, I'm sure there is. And as Morgan alluded to earlier, saying that, like if there are certain applications where, I guess, if you had some long distance ferry with a very small hull form, it would be very difficult to fit in enough batteries. But then when we look towards Scandinavia, I mean, these big roll packs ferries are moving to all battery. And then you got again, what Ray had said about future proofing, where we're seeing, maybe it's an onboard recharging battery system for peak shaving, with the development of the technology to be implemented later for infrastructure or increasing the energy density on board in the future. So I would say that, yes, I'm sure there are applications where it doesn't make sense. And I guess that's the question of makes sense, is what's the qualifier when making that decision. I think there's benefit can be achieved by almost every application, especially if you're looking towards that future proofing, if you're trying to get some of these operational savings, if you can get some funding, but certainly some lend themselves more than others. Some, just kind of clearly make sense that you're going to have a, really much better time operationally. And then some are definitely more challenging. That's without a doubt. I think some are more challenging, but I don't know if the future is diesel mechanical for many applications in the ferry market, though, to be honest. So I have a tough time saying that there are situations that are 100% outside of the technology, but I'm not going to be so naive as to say it fits every single application we could ever think of. That's also not true.
Sure. Ed, I'm going to actually end on you, and then we're going to jump into the audience Q&A. So audience, if you have not yet submitted your questions, please do so now. Ed, excuse me, do you think there's any special training of crews involved? Do you think it's needed to operate these new hybrid vessels? I imagine the answer is yes, but maybe not.
Yes, so definitely training, because we're talking about a big shift. This is a big shift in technology, depending on where you're ending up in the new technology. So diesel electric is not really a big shift. I mean, diesel electric boats have been around for over 120 years. ABB's been doing diesel electric vessels. So that technology, especially in the offshore industry, the cruise industry, is really well established. So I don't want to give the implication that all this technology is new. But with regard to, definitely regarding to these alternative fuel technologies, but also the energy storage systems where you're really kind of relying on this electrical backbone, and you're not being as mechanical in your operations and your maintenance, there is a shift. But we're hoping that the shift is also to reduce the amount of onboard operational maintenance. That's one of the goals of this technology, and one of the reasons why the whole world is kind of shifting to this technology. I think sometimes we burden ourselves in the marine industry that we have to solve the industrial questions of technology, but we're going to adapt the technology that is already being utilized. So the automobile industry is looking at the benefits that come from moving to electric, reduced maintenance, these types of things, which is also something the marine industry should look to achieve. So the goal should be to kind of reduce the amount of onboard work, maintenance, these types of things, and then shift the skills. Definitely, it's definitely a shift, but also as an industry, we're seeing that we have less and less qualified mariners for these mechanical skills, and we have more and more people who are interested in less laborious efforts, and these are definitely less laborious efforts. That it kind of aligns itself with the direction that the workforce is going. So it's kind of it's tough for owners to make the switch, but it's also, I think. I think it'll have more benefit, and the training is there, and there's also less work. I mean, right now, I'm sure Ray and a lot of his colleagues could take apart an engine, put it back together again really quickly, and strip down a gearbox, but you won't be doing that kind of works with variable frequency drives or motors or these types of things. So you won't have that same requirement, but you will have to adapt to some new technology for sure. And automation is a big part of it too. It's learning automation.
I'm sure, yeah. Okay, guys, that wraps up the discussion portion of today's webcast. We did receive several questions from the Marine Log audience related to our talk today, so I'm going to go ahead and jump on into those questions and see what everyone had to say. All right, let me look at these. There's so many. I'm going to go ahead and start with just, with this one real quick. Ray, this is for you. Have you had many hurdles in meeting the Buy America requirements that come along with the federal funding?
Well, there's always going to be hurdles with Buy America. And just when you think you've got them figured out, they raise the percentage on you, or they change the rules up, or they're not offering any kind of waivers. I think it's really important during the time that you're working with the designers, the engineering firms, that we pick out and we kind of really look at, making sure that the things that we're asking for are actually available in the U.S., whether it's, anything from the seats to the lighting, all those little things can help you get to that 70% threshold for Buy America. There's, from the pandemic, a lot of things have been moving back to the U.S. as far as manufacturing goes as well. And I think that trend's going to continue to tick up, where a lot of these things that we weren't able to get, engines and propulsion systems, there's a lot more people in that market now that are all U.S. made, that are making it easier to meet those standards. And, because, it's a Jones Act boat, it's got to be manufactured in a U.S. yard. There's ways of getting your percentage with assembly in the U.S. and a lot of the raw materials for your aluminum or your steel, that all plays into that, getting to that 70% threshold. I think the big thing is just planning and making sure what you have is available.
All right. This question kind of goes back to the funding discussion we had a little bit ago, are there funding sources that would be provided to engineering design teams to create and then present to owners? Morgan, maybe is there something like that?
Not as many, but there are some of these grants have an engineering aspect, a design aspect of it. The recently awarded RAISE grant, I believe, had a portion that was set aside for design efforts. So again, there are some grants that have construction and design portions of it, but it's going to be probably fewer grant opportunities, I think, on the engineering side of things. But again, you just have to look at the fine print and find the right grant opportunities. Going back to what Ray said, you don't just limit yourself to one grant. Find as many opportunities as you possibly can, and it should cover a lot of the cost of doing the design efforts in some cases. So.
Okay. I have several questions that sort of bring up the Buy American policies and things like that. Can anyone speak, kind of talk to that a little more? What's affecting these efforts? Is there something that you feel like our audience should know about that, specifically relating to this topic? Anyone?
It's difficult.
I'm sure it is.
I mean, the effects of it are, supply chain issues, finding the right manufacturers in the U.S. that can meet these requirements. And like Ray said, it's a kind of a moving target sometimes. It's where do you actually land on your project?
Sure. Okay. Let's talk safety for a second. How about the safety aspect in regard to operation? Is there not less risk of propulsion failure compared to traditional diesel where runs are short?
Well, so with us, what we've experienced and other operators that I've talked to, the Coast Guard is not going to let you have a boat that doesn't have any kind of redundancy with that vessel. So like with our hybrid electric vessel that we have now, and even with the electric vessel we're building, they're two separate systems. And I know there's an operator out in New York that's doing the same thing. They're two completely separate systems. So if you lose one system, you can still get back to the dock and do what you need to do. And most of, like with our vessels, they're all catamarans. So they're actually completely separated in their entirety. So you have that redundancy with everything. And if you lose everything, it doesn't matter. You're going to have that same issue on a diesel electric. We've had probably better reliability with our hybrid system than we have with the traditional diesel engine, mainly because those diesel engines aren't running at a consistent high speed for the whole day. They're coming on their variable speed. They're only running about 50% of the time as a vessel that's comparable to it. So the risk of failure for us is a little bit lower. And knowing that you're being vetted through the Coast Guard and the engineering firms that you're working with are going to make sure that you're not going to be able to intentionally or unintentionally put yourself in a position where you're going to lose all ability to get back to a dock.
Okay. Here's another question. What kilowatt-hour battery systems can be expected to be used on 100% electric ferries? I don't know if Ed, you'd be the best one, or maybe Morgan. Do either of you have any? Or either way.
If you have a definitive answer, Morgan, I'll let you go. Because I hate to give the proverbial "it depends," but
it depends. I hate to skirt around the question, but I would like to know more details. As all engineers want more details to help answer the question better.
Yeah, I wish I had more.
We could follow up with whomever asked that question. We could follow up to get more detail. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Okay, let's jump on this one then instead, and it's actually by the same person. So hopefully we can get some of this answered. How was hybrid set up? Is it a diesel charging pack running electric motors, or can you kind of talk about the hybrid setup a little bit?
So for us, the diesel hybrid that we have right now, we've got two variable speed diesel generators that power the actual battery pack, and those battery packs then power a traction motor for the propellers. So there's no direct connection with that diesel engine to any of the propeller shafts. So we have the ability, or we'll soon have the ability to, if we wanted to, just be able to run off the electricity provided by the generator. But right now our current configuration is just we're running off the battery packs. And when the battery packs get to a certain state of charge, the generators kick on, bring it back up to an appropriate state of charge, shut off, and then we just run off of the battery packs.
Okay.
It's a more typical hybrid design.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. Has a study on life cycle costs and 5-year maintenance and overhaul costs been completed for any hybrid ferries?
Absolutely. It's usually just the standard process of why would we do this? You know, if you have a client or an operator that's asking questions about, show me the benefits of an alternative fuel system or a battery system, and this is part of the process, doing a life cycle cost analysis, showing where the cost savings will be, the overall capital costs. This is just it's part of our process for sure.
Okay. All right. A few more questions we have time for. Do any of you anticipate operators predominantly repowering existing diesel-powered vessels or commissioning purpose-built alternative fuel battery vessels?
Well, we have a history of keeping old boats running in this country for sure. So I would imagine a mix for sure. I mean, the cost to replace vessels, if you can't get enough subsidies or government incentives, it's going to be an option to repower to one of these new alternatives. We'll come back to arrangements, though, depending on what alternative fuel I have and the cost associated with changing arrangements for fuel storage. It's a completely different animal. So as much as I would like to say that, yes, vessels will be repowered, it just depends on the operation, the arrangements, and the route.
Sure. All right. This person wants to know the panel's thoughts on the various options of alternative fuels. So we touched on some of them, but hydrogen, methanol, ammonia, etc. And the biggest challenges with each of those. Now, Ed, I'm sure you have opinions on some of those, and Morgan and Ray, maybe you do too. So I don't know where to start. Ed, did you want to kind of chime in, and then we can go around? If you have thoughts.
I'll defer my time because I think Morgan's probably done a lot of research on this.
I was going to say, okay.
Yeah, this is the greatest question, right? What alternative fuels? The pros and cons to all of them, and there are a slew of pros and cons to every choice. And like I said before, crystal ball thoughts. Just about every alternative fuel that's being proposed, there are advantages, there are disadvantages. They're all different. Just like Ed said, don't try to compare it to diesel because it's going to lose and you're going to be disappointed. So just start over, really. And I will say it comes down to availability. Where are you in the country? Where are you in the world? What fuels will be available to you, and how much will it cost? And again, going back to the earlier discussion, start looking at batteries first. The beautiful thing about battery technology, if you can put batteries in your new ferry vessel, is you might not have clean electricity wherever you are in the region. You might not have that. You might, but any incremental change to the grid, any change to hydro or a clean energy source in that power grid, you will immediately benefit in your all-electric ferry. So that is one of the distinct advantages to having an all-electric vessel is immediate changes to that grid. You will benefit from it instead of having to wait for a green source of ammonia or a green source of hydrogen. So, but really it comes down to availability, cost, and it's a crystal ball right now.
Okay. All right. Good answer. All right, Ed, I'm going to give this to you. But again, if you want to toss it to someone else, that's fine.
Let me hear what it is first. Yeah, let me see.
Well, this was easy. I feel like this
phone a friend or okay.
This one's easy, and you'll see why. Why are other U.S. industries not jumping on this awesome trend as quickly as the ferry market?
Okay. As I read that, I think industries, other segments, because we're seeing all industries kind of move to electrification, whether you're building a factory nowadays or these types of, that's why we're benefiting from it. So I'll say it's different segments. And I think it's just the fit right now. So the technology, where the technology is, and then how that vessel operates. So if you have a very small footprint, so as we all know, vessels are kind of designed around CFRs. You want to keep it within a certain size because it falls within a certain CFR. There's advantages to that. So you want to put as much in as small of envelope as possible and do as much as you can with it. And then in the commercial, we're talking about non-ferries commercial vessels, you usually want them to do as many things as possible so that they're as attractive to lease as possible. And all this lends itself against this technology. Variable operations is not good for designing to this technology because you want to really kind of understand what your operation is and then maximize the benefit for that operation. So it's on the commercial side, we're seeing the combination of the funding. If we look at the funding is going to the ferry, state, municipal, It's not as strong in the commercial operations world. I know there's some CARB funding that's unique for California, but just universally, there's not as much funding for commercial operators as there are for ferry operators right now. So that's hurting them. And then the fact that the vessels have as varying an operational profile as possible is also what's kind of hurting. So it just isn't as moved along. But if we look at universally, I don't think there's a segment. If we look at what's going on right now with container ships, there's a huge build cycle of container ships going right now. They're all looking at, shaft generating, PTI, putting batteries on board, methanol fuel, tankers, fish vessels. Like every segment is exploring this alternative. Is not saying, oh, it doesn't fit, so I'm just going to build a diesel mechanical boat like it was 1964. They're not doing that, but they're maybe slower to adopt the technology. But I wouldn't say that the technology doesn't fit just yet. I think it's just maybe a time-wise. And then you're going to see these big, we see big companies doing big investments. The cruise industry is looking really hard at how do they decrease their footprint. So you're going to start to see some big shifts soon, I think.
Okay. I have time for probably 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. Where does battery analytics fit in the future application of battery technology in ferries? Or is it a non-issue and the battery manufacturers have that covered sufficiently? Any takers?
Battery analytics.
And
I guess the question with the analytics, the way I interpret that is the life cycle or the charge cycle and dissipation. So what we are is, I forget, Maritime Battery Forum. It's a forum out of Norway of all operators that, operators with batteries, and they kind of upload their information. And I forget, they just sent that, I just saw an email of a few hundred, 600 vessels now running with batteries globally. So we are getting that data back, and it's like, is it tracking to the life cycle that was predicted at the beginning of the design versus what it's actually being achieved? The thing to know about batteries is they are, in some ways, a bit temperamental with how you charge them, the temperature in which you charge them and run them. These types of things can affect the life of the battery. So that's what's maybe unique, is saying, hey, taking this kind of transportation technology, putting it into the marine industry, how is it being, what is the real life effect of it in the maritime industry? And what we're seeing is it's lining. It's pretty much where we anticipated battery life to be, is where we're seeing it trending to. And we'll get more and more data every year as, a couple hundred boats with batteries are built globally every year. And then we're, the boats that have now been in service for 5 years, they're going to be in service 6 years, 7 years, 10 years. We'll get more and more analysis. We're seeing boats going through their first overhaul or transitioning of the old batteries out, new batteries in. We're seeing that cycle happening. So I think it's good, but it's kind of evolving for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Last question, and then we'll wrap things up here. And for all of those of you who submitted questions and we didn't have time to answer today, I will submit those to the panelists, and hopefully they can get back to you. And if not, I'll do what I can to get you some answers. Aside from the skills or best practice driven changes in workforce requirements, are you guys seeing any regulatory changes to mariner licensing or certification on the horizon?
I don't necessarily know yet, but I can't imagine that there won't be some changes to the mariner license requirements. I think, back when Ed and I were in school, Ed, did you get your gas turbine attachment? Right?
Yes.
So that was
free endorsement. Didn't have to do anything
for gas turbine operation. So I don't doubt that the Coast Guard will most likely have future requirements for some of these alternative fuel arrangements, because it is different. Things have changed. We don't necessarily need our steam endorsement anymore, Ed, but it was fun going through that process.
Good. Not a big fan of watch standing anyway, so good.
So yeah, Heather, I would imagine so.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll
please do
kind of comment on that too. I see it more. We're all 3, engineers. I was a chief at one point as well, and so I see it more regulatory on the engineering side of the house, not necessarily on the deck side, because the boat operates the same. You still have all the same rules that you have to follow when you're actually operating the vessel. It's more of what happens downstairs, I think, is when the Coast Guard revamps those questions and requirements. I think that's where the biggest change is going to be, not necessarily to the deck side.
Yeah, there will be a big change to how you bunker. So this is one of the concerns, is just bunkering. If you just look at hydrogen, the changes to and the challenges to bunkering hydrogen it's significantly different than most operators are aware or have to deal with right now. So.
Sure. All right. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank you, Morgan, Ed, Ray. Thank you so much for joining us today. And to the audience, we are so glad you joined MarineLog, Glosten, ABB, and Kitsap Transit for this Green Ferry webinar. This webinar will be available on demand for the next 6 months if you'd want to watch it again or share it with colleagues. And remember, I will try to get to the rest of your questions as soon as I can. Also, please stick around at the end for a brief 3-question survey, if you don't mind. I hope to see many of our viewers in person next week at our Ferries conference. I did see questions about the sea change. We will talk about that thoroughly. But if I don't see you, have a great rest of your week and see you soon.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Ed.